topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Park. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Park's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyapark.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyapark.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Park.
Good morning, listeners. And when we hear about history, we all talk about what's happening with history? We don't want to talk about history. Nobody wanted to remember the dates. But today we are going to be looking at history in a very, very different way. And also, I'm excited to share my book is going to be out this week, The AI Agency. So when you get a chance, do look it up under my name, and just super excited about it. So welcome, Steve.
Hey, Divya, how are you? Congratulations on the book.
Thank you. So share with us as to how did you get into the history?
Well, it's interesting. I spent most of my career in leadership positions, and I made a lot of mistakes. And I was on a business trip one time, probably about 15 years ago, and I stopped by the bookstore in the Milwaukee airport, and I saw a book that was called Leadership Secrets from Attila the Hun by Wes Roberts. And I thought, that sounds interesting. So I picked it up. I read it on the trip. And I thought, wow, there's a lot of things that Attila did way back then that I could use to help me become a better leader. And I really didn't think about a book at the time. I just kind of started to apply some of the techniques. It's still sitting on my bookshelf. And maybe 13, 14 years ago, I remember that book. I took it out and I thought, well, you know what? If there's one person out there that's a historical figure that we can learn from and apply positive lessons in today's management, then there's got to be a bunch of other ones. So then I started the research and came up with a cast of characters that are in the book, looking for not necessarily the people you would think of as leadership material because they were known for being, warriors and outlaws and rebels and, capturing other tribes and kingdoms. But the thing that I thought about is they had to be doing a lot of things right to be so successful, because every single one of them was extremely successful. And the more research I did, the more I found that, some of these lessons are timeless. I mean, what applied to Sun Tzu 2,500 years ago still works today. So I said, I wish I had a book like this when I was getting into leadership, because it would have given me kind of a shortcut to avoid some of the pain points I went through.
Yeah, no, definitely. So tell us about your journey. You mentioned that, you were in the leadership positions and all that. So tell us what field you were in, and tell us a little bit more about that journey.
Sure, absolutely. So I started out, my family owned a small manufacturing company. So I started out in the family business. I learned, I'm from the Midwest. So my folks instilled the Midwest work ethic, and going to work for the family business was a little challenging for any, I guess, relative of a business owner, because you either have to, work harder than everybody else to prove that you're not just there because you're the owner's kid, or you can, everybody's worked for a business or know somebody probably where the owner's children or relatives feel they don't have to work quite so hard because, their dad owns a company. Well, I had to prove myself at an early age that, I can stand on my own. So I kind of got my work ethic early on. And then I spent the next 22 years as I moved on to various competitors of the business that in manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always a supervisor or a manager or at a higher director level throughout my first 22 years. And then I went to work for my biggest customer, which was kind of a step up the food chain. It was a contract manufacturer. When I started with them, they were, I don't know, $350 million company, which, I'd been involved in small businesses. So this was kind of a medium-sized business to me. And I was tasked with putting together a team that would go out and develop a global supply chain that would support this company's tremendous growth plans. When I left the company, they were about $3 billion, and this year they're about to hit $4 billion. So we had to structure it, go out and find companies in all the different kinds of, fabrication of metal and plastics and printed circuit boards and electronics and assembly and cables, and find a supply chain that would not only support our growth, but then we also had to manage that supply chain from a strategic standpoint. So me and my team literally got to see 1,000 companies all over the world. So we got to see what worked really well and what didn't work really well. So I got that experience for 15 years. I held the position of global sourcing commodity manager. And then that experience taught me that there was a lot of people out there that really did a great job, but there was just as many people that could use some help. And my kind of unique experience of being, on the ground floor, working in shops and building things, to getting to work with these, the best companies throughout the world that other companies could benefit from my knowledge. So I started this company in 2013, and I've been going pretty strong ever since. So that was my I guess work history.
Mm.
But I've always been a writer,
I
throughout the
I
whole
see.
time.
Yeah. So now that makes sense. And so let's kind of go back to your journey. So many times when we talk about the corporations and organizations, people have this idea of people sitting either openly, like, either working remotely, since especially COVID, or people working in open spaces or in offices, and nobody focuses on the manufacturing. And I've been in on the manufacturing side, not fully, but have had a lot of interactions with that and supply chain and all that. So
Sure.
let's kind of dive into that.
Sure, absolutely.
So tell me, like, so from the manufacturing perspective, you are on the floor, and it's not just because what happens is that when you're sitting on the cube, it's you, your computer, team meetings, versus this, you're experiencing like live problems throughout the day. And even though you may have standard operating procedures, you may have protocols and all of that. So tell us, like, what were some of your learnings and what were some of the challenges that you faced during that time?
That's a good question, and it really ties into kind of the theme of the book. I changed my leadership style just because of what you had just mentioned. Back, COVID didn't hit until I had this company, so most of my career was face-to-face meetings, a lot of travel, going to see customers, going to see suppliers, where we didn't have the technology to do what we can do today. So one of the, I guess, hardest lessons that I learned, and one of the first lessons that I learned, is you really have to lead by example. You can't be sitting in your office just barking out orders and expecting your people to want to follow you, because that doesn't work. You've got to be out there side by side on the floor with them as problems come up, being out there and willing to get your hands dirty. And I think that earns you a lot of respect, and it earns you a lot of trust. And those are two of the cornerstones to any great leader, is being out there with your people, leading by example, and not asking them to do something you haven't done yourself. So
Hmm.
problems come up real time. You've got to react quickly. You've got to make very quick decisions. And the other thing that I learned is, we're not perfect. Nobody, even the best leaders, make mistakes. But the key to that is recognizing when you make a mistake and being able to course correct and change direction. So saying, you know what, guys, I steered you wrong. I told you what to do, and we totally messed this up. We got to come up with a new solution and get my team's input and go out and change course. And I think that's one of the biggest parts of being a great leader is recognizing when you do make a mistake and being able to change it quickly.
Hmm. Absolutely. And when you talk about on the floor, tell us more about what kind of problems would you experience?
Mostly quality problems, right? So, we made stuff. So if there was no problems, there's not a lot of things going on out in the floor other than production moving and things going great. But no manufacturing company is that good. There's always something happening, whether it's a process problem or a product problem. You've got to get out there and get your hands dirty and solve it, right? Is the equipment,
Yeah.
operating correctly? Like you said, you've got work instructions and documentation on how to actually do the job, but you're still working with people and people are imperfect. So there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be issues that have to be handled. There's going to have to be customer interaction to determine whether or not we can get through this, or we have to maybe rebuild the product or come up with a repair or something. So you're constantly fighting, what the customer expects, which is perfection, versus what you can actually produce, which is maybe close to perfection. So you've always got to have that balance and be an advocate for the customer as well as an advocate for your company. Because it's expensive to rework, it's expensive to scrap parts. So you've always got to be working on, well, how do I balance that and what's in the best interest of all parties? And those are the kind of things that any leader in manufacturing faces on an hourly basis sometimes.
Yeah. So the thing is that it's important to incorporate and integrate some quality systems. So this way, you're not waiting till the last minute that, oh gosh, this product hasn't turned out good. It's important to have those checks and balances at different time points, whether it is automated. I know, like you're mentioning that, we have got technology now. So whether it's technology or whether it's humans, so tell us more. I know that you work on the quality management systems. What are some of the essentials to have that in the process so that way you're not like experiencing the problem at the end of the chain?
Right, right. Well, a core part of my outside of my writing, my core part of my company is helping companies improve their business processes, which is their quality system, right? It basically covers everything from quoting to shipping in any type of business, whether you're manufacturing or service. And I help them streamline their systems and put controls in place so that we minimize the problems. And what I do with every single client first time we get together is we kind of set expectations, right? We look at, okay, we got to look at where you're at now and where you want to be. Where are your pain points? What's causing you the most grief? And I just go through, once we start working together, we go through every single major department in the company, and I kind of have a little three question test that I ask them. I said, first off, is this process working the way you want it to? Obviously, they're bringing me in, so the processes usually aren't working as well as they'd like them to be. And then the third is, okay, if it is working the way you want it to, is there a way to streamline it and make it better? And then the last question that really is the most important is what you're doing adding value to the company? Because
Mhm.
a lot of people do a lot of things that they think need to be done, but whatever, if they're a certified company to like say an ISO standard, then they may be doing a lot of things that they think have to be done, but in reality it's just busy work, right? So it's taking away from them actually adding more value to the company. So we go through that process through all of them. And I think the biggest thing that kind of a system does for any manufacturing or service company is it standardizes, like you said, standardizes work, make things consistent, because people are always going to be, like I said, imperfect. But at least from a training standpoint, from a day-to-day operational standpoint, we've standardized the work process so that we should get fairly consistent results. And consistency is what manufacturing is all about.
Absolutely. And you nailed it when you said that consistency is the key. Because first of all, it got to be sustainable. Any process that you have, if you want consistent, repeatable, robust process and repeatable results for consistency, then the process gotta like be producing that same product every single time.
Right.
And that's where like you are talking about the quality checks, and having those quality checks at different pain points is really really important. And one thing that you said really resonated with me is that your three questions,
Oh,
it's
yes.
about continuous improvement.
Right.
Are we just doing the busy work, or revisiting those processes and seeing like where could I shorten it? And even if I'm shortening it, that it doesn't impact the quality, where am I doing the busy work? So assessing those and increasing the value before thinking of scaling, because so many times what happens is there are companies, they start out in a lot of startups have those growing pains, and then when there are falls, then it doesn't scale. So
Right.
that's really good. So now, of course, as we have talked about some of the manufacturing pains, we don't have enough time to go through it. So tell us, like in the manufacturing arena, or it could be global supplier vendors, like dealing, or even for that matter, when people are there, who were like a couple of your like favorite historical leaders
Hmm.
in their lifestyle, and like how did you measure their success? How did you define their success? Because there are a lot of leaders out there that have been there and who have been viewed as fearsome, and in some eyes they would not be successful. So what were your criteria as you started writing the book?
Well, I get it asked that a lot. That like who's your favorite leader, and it's hard to pick just one or two. I love them all. And one of the things I usually fall back on is there's two people in the book, Sonny Barger, who ran the Hells Angels for almost 5 decades, and Steve Jobs, and because they lived in my lifetime.
Mm,
I got to see the results of their efforts, and I lived it as they were living it. So the other people are historical. All you can do is do research, and you know about them. You learn about how they conquered and how they did this, and Catherine the Great and all the things she did to maintain her control over Russia for 35 years. But the people that like Sonny and Steve Jobs, I was a big fan of both of those people long before I thought about writing the book. So I knew about each of them, and they were interesting. One of the, I guess, common themes that run through all of the characters in the book is every single one of them would prefer uh, to go down the nonviolent path first, right? They would try to negotiate agreements or settlements or takeovers or negotiate a surrender without having to go to battle in some cases, or they only resorted to violence when peace didn't work. So I thought that was really interesting because you don't think of people like Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun and Blackbeard the Pirate as negotiators. You think of them as very brutal criminals,
yep.
but they would rather they were smart enough to know that if I can take over this particular other competitor and not lose any of my men, then that's a win-win. And they always sought to I guess come up with a win-win instead of a zero-sum kind of a negotiation.
Mm,
And the other thing that ran through that Steve Jobs is kind of universally known as a heretic. He created things and did things that nobody expected, that he always challenged the status quo. That's kind of the theme throughout the book as well. Every one of these people challenged the status quo in their respective time period and circumstances to kind of look like those three questions, right? Why are we doing it this way? And is it the best way to do things? So I think that there's lessons from every single one of them that resonate with me personally, because what I included in the book is there's 20 lessons, one lesson from the leader, and then a lesson from my personal experience with that particular situation where I either succeeded or failed very poorly. So I'm hoping the audience can learn from my failures and mistakes just as much as they can learn from the successes of the leaders that are in the book. So if I had to pick a couple, I'd pick Sonny and Steve Jobs only because I know them in real time. The other
Mm-hmm.
leaders are just, the research and the records that they left behind of their battles and their successes and the things that they did right. So I guess I'd have to go with Sonny and Steve.
So tell us one of their successes that resonated with you, and how did you pair it with your own success or failure?
One of the things that's really interesting about Sonny Barger, you think of the Hells Angels. My wife and I rode Harleys for 13 years, and we were not part of that 1% culture. We were part of the 99% that just like to ride motorcycles with a group of people. So we were motorcycle enthusiasts, long before I even had a thought about writing the book. But what Sonny did, you look at a motorcycle gang, especially an outlaw motorcycle gang, they're some of the toughest people in the world, right? It's not like you're working with a bunch of engineers. You're working with people that are very violent, very brutal. And Sonny would motivate them and keep them under control by encouraging their input, getting their perspective on decisions before they were made. One of the core concepts of a motorcycle club is something called church. And that's kind of like a strategic meeting, right? The leadership team gets together at a conference table in a clubhouse, and that's where all the business is done for the motorcycle group, and all the decisions are made. Most groups, the president would just say, here's what we're going to do, here's the plan, and we're going to go execute it. Where Sonny would give everybody at the table a voice. And I learned a lot from that, because when I started my career, I was very autocratic, right? It was my way. I thought I had all the answers. Sonny teaches that great leaders know they don't have all the answers. They want to surround themselves with, the biggest and the brightest people that they can find. And I really, really changed my leadership style when an employee came up to me after I had given out the day's orders for what had to get done. And she said, you know what, you need to listen to us a little bit more. And that was really a smack in the head, thinking that, what, I don't have all the answers. The people that are actually doing the job know that job way better than I ever will. So that taught me to involve them in decisions, to take their input, to get a diversity of perspectives. And, it's kind of overused, but really 2 heads or 3 heads or 4 heads are always better than one. You make way better decisions when you get other people's perspectives. And that's what Sonny did. Groupthink is very destructive. And everybody's had bad bosses, right? And I've had bosses who surround themselves with yes men and yes women that agree with them no matter what they think. Sonny taught me that, you want to hire people smarter than you whenever you can. You want people to want your job. Poor leaders are afraid of that. They're threatened by that. They're worried about losing their job. But, that's the wrong way to think about it. You want people that are smarter than you, because you're going to be better. You're going to make better decisions. If they want your job, I'd like every one of my people on my team to want my job, because for them to succeed, they got to make me look good. And for them to move up, hopefully I'm moving up. So I think that's what sets great leaders apart from weak leaders, is that ability to take information and really listen to their employees about things that impact their employees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And thank you for being vulnerable and sharing what you thought and how you changed. So, as you went through the change, where you were thinking it was my way or highway, to going and getting people's perspective. So many times, also, what happens is that, just like anything, there are blind spots with all the things. Sometimes leaders are getting so caught up in getting everybody's perspective that there is a analysis paralysis, because everybody may have
Exactly.
their 2 cents. And did you experience that? And if you did, how did you overcome that?
That's exact. I use that quote in one of my lessons. Analysis by paralysis. You've got to be able to, as a leader, understand when you have making a decision with the information available at the time, right? You can wait forever to get more data, more perspectives, more input, and it kind of, like you said, paralyzes you. I think George Patton said a good plan executed today is better than a great plan executed next week, right? Do something
Mhm.
now. So a great leader has got to be able to understand, I've got to make a decision with the best information I've got right now. And it's better to make a decision and be wrong than wait too long and make a decision that's right, because then you've missed the opportunity. So I had to learn that. I had to learn that, there's a point that you reach that additional data is going to do nothing but cloud your decision making. Bringing more people in is going to do nothing but slow down the process, right?
Mhm.
Span of control is important. You want to keep your teams to a manageable size, a decision making team. If you're running a department to 3 to 5 people, any more than that, nobody's going to agree on anything, and you're going to just be going around and spinning your wheels, right? And you've got to be able to recognize that, what that point is. When do I hit that point where, okay, I have all the information I need, let's collectively make a decision? And if you can't do that, then you have to fall back on, okay, I hear all your points, I understand the concerns, I think this is the direction we need to go, and you've got to sell it to them, right? You can't
Mhm.
demand it, you've got to sell it to them to get their buy-in. So you're
Absolutely.
you're absolutely right. I mean, analysis paralysis, it happens every single day to every single leader if they're not careful.
Absolutely. So that brings two questions to my mind. So you mentioned that you got to sell it to the people to get their buy-in. So what are some of the key elements that you have used in your personal life to sell tough decisions to people when some of them may be not liking the decision?
There's yes, and there's a bit of an art to that, right? I mean, using the Socratic method, where you ask questions you know the answer to, but you're trying to get the other person to see the same answer that you have, right?
Hmm.
One of the hardest things, and I don't want this to come off as anything other than genuine, but one of the hardest things it is as a leader to do is to get people to kind of go in the direction you want them to go, but think that it's their idea, and not being disingenuous, but actually, convince them of ways to think about a problem in a different perspective, so that they might think, oh, I never thought of it that way. And they will naturally change what they thought was the right path. But now they're thinking, well, maybe I didn't see that obstacle, or I didn't see that consequence of going down that path. So just kind of going back and forth and asking questions, kind of self-directing them to, here's the point that we want to get to, a solution that works for everybody and solves the problem in the quickest way, but leading them, not directing them, not demanding anything of them, but leading them in a way that gets them to change their thinking. And sometimes they may think of something that you didn't think of, that, what, I didn't think of it in that perspective. And that, like I said, you always make better decisions with a team effort, an effective small team effort, than you would all by yourself, because you only think, the way that you think, and you may not consider somebody else's background or experience, and they see things coming that you might not see coming. So the trick is to get everybody to be open and honest and share and talk. And then it's kind of organic. The output, kind of grows on its own. And you have to be careful, like you said, to not let it get out of control or go off into directions that you don't want it to go. You got to keep them focused, but you want them to start to look at things and start to consider, okay, if we do it this way, what's the good and the bad that can happen? And once they start doing that, everybody kind of collectively starts thinking about the problem in the same reference. And then they come up with a solution that's more of what you thought maybe was a direction we should be going. But like I
Hmm.
said, sometimes, I'd find out I was totally wrong, that just by going through that process, I found out that they had a better solution than I would have ever thought of on my own. So it's all about coaching and mentoring and kind of steering them to a collective best solution win-win situation.
Absolutely. Now, to add a little twist to what we are talking, and this may sound contradictory, unfortunately, sometimes what happens is that reality is very different than what we
Mm.
talk about. So, you mentioned that it's important that we do take some decision, because if we keep on waiting, things will not pan out. But then there are so many cultures where people are not allowed to fail,
Mm.
where you know that like you take a decision and if it goes the wrong way, you will be penalized for it. You may be made the scapegoat. So, what are some of the ways that you dealt with that? I'm sure you experienced that because there's so many of my clients who will come to me with that. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Absolutely. The I guess environment you need to create is one where people are not afraid to take risks, right?
Hmm.
You know, a lot of leaders are very punitive when an employee makes a mistake, right? They're punished in some way, or they're cut out of decision making for a while. I think that's totally 180 degrees wrong. I think you need to reward people that are willing to take a calculated risk, right? You
Yeah.
don't want your employees to be reckless, but the status quo really never created any game changers. It's the people that thought outside the box, if you will, that we haven't tried it this way. I'm going to see what happens if we do it this way. And they're going to fail, but they're going to succeed too. And I think that by rewarding failures that were started with good intentions to improve a process or and to improve the product quality or customer service, I think that by rewarding people for taking that risk and trying something new will just give them more confidence to keep taking risks and coming up with better ideas. And obviously, if a individual is consistently making poor decisions, that's one thing. But generally, what happens is I reward failures as long as there's learning that comes along with it, right? I made a mistake, but I learned why it didn't work. And I can apply that to the next thing I may want to try so I can avoid that and maybe become more successful. So I think it's totally wrong-headed to have a punitive mindset for people that want to bring in, fresh eyes and fresh ideas and things that haven't been tried before, because one of the success killers is this is the way we've always done it, and people accepting that and going along with it, and nobody questioning, well, why have we always done it that way, getting back to those three questions I asked.
Yeah.
So I think creating a culture of diversity, creating a culture that empowers people to make decisions, right? Because you go back to the quote I said, great leaders know they don't have all the right answers. You've got to rely on your people. You got to pick good people to start with, but then you have to kind of, here's where we have to be. Here's our goal, and then kind of get out of their way and let them do their jobs and be willing to accept that they're not always going to make the right choices. But if they learn from them, they're going to make a better choice next time. And many leaders are
Absolutely.
afraid of that.
Absolutely. You're right on mark. And what you mentioned about is calculated risk. It's
Mm.
about making those informed decisions. It's about, and if you're that scared as a leader that, oh, what is my leadership team going to think, what you can do, then as you talked about the quality management systems, you can bake in the risk analysis. So this way, you know that your team has done the risk analysis before making the decision. So it's along with creating that culture, also empowering them with the resources that can help them and allowing them to fail. Such a powerful lesson over there, Steve. So now tell us, where could people connect? And if there are like, a couple of lessons that you want to share with our audience.
Oh, sure. So anybody can get a hold of me through my book's website, stevewilliamsauthor.com, and they can get an autographed copy of the book if they like. If your audience wants to order the book and they mention that they saw your show, I give them a 10% discount. And there's a couple of things that I think everybody that's listening would, benefit from a very high level. And you go to Steve Jobs, right? He had a famous quote that said, people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that are actually changing the world, right? I think that what he was looking at is think outside the box, right? Be a heretic. It was heretics that discovered the world isn't flat. I mean, we would have made no progress through any of our industrial revolutions without people that would think of things differently than it's always been done. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest things a leader can do is look outside their little comfort zone and start looking at, well, let's find a way to make this process better. Let's find a way to make this employee better, or this company better, or a product better. And I think what they'll learn is that relying on your team and getting their input, letting them fail. It's funny that somebody like Sonny Barger, who ran the Hells Angels, his quote was, "I've got to give my people the freedom to screw up." I mean, who would have thought that the leader of a motorcycle gang would think that way? But he knew that as long as they learned from their mistakes, that the mistakes would start to go down and the successes would start to go up. So he was not your typical motorcycle, president. He led from a place that other people can take a lot of lessons from. So there's lessons in here from everybody, from building the right team. Why waiting too long to make a decision is worse than making a decision quickly and it being wrong. How to negotiate win-wins, and how to avoid that analysis by paralysis, and know when to make a decision and when to look for a little bit more information before you do. So those are all lessons any leader can benefit from.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. Any other last thoughts you'd like to add?
Just, leaders have to believe in themselves. They have to have the confidence to know that, I've got to trust myself. I've got to trust my team. And I know that we're not going to be perfect, but we're going to get as close as we can, right? I'm from Wisconsin. Vince Lombardi, legendary coach of the Green Bay Packers, was, he's still a legend here. And one of his famous quotes is, we're going to chase perfection. We may not catch it, but we will get to excellence. So setting the goal high, understanding that you may not reach it, but you'll get pretty close, I think is what leaders have to understand, that they have to be both, set the bar high, but also set achievable goals that we can hit and get incremental improvement over time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts and bringing to the forefront that fail fast. Because when you fail fast, then you know how to succeed in the future. And thank you for joining us, and wonderful audience. Without you, the show would not be possible. And it's important to allow that space and give yourself that permission to make mistakes, because from where I sit, there are no mistakes. I mean, of course, there are some mistakes which we cannot reverse. So it's important to kind of think about that as well. But allowing yourself to learn from those and use them as learning opportunities and growing forward.
Right.
And let us know what else you would like for us to bring to you so that you can live your life the best you can. And thank you, Juan, for making the show technically possible. Be well and take care until next time.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyapark.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyapark.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.